Dozens of people from across the country gathered outside a Washington, D.C. jail on Saturday to protest for the release of people charged in the January 6th Capitol riot. The Washington Post reports the group was protesting about 50 people who are being held in the jail, whom they called non-violent American patriots. But one of those alleged patriots will face sentencing later today, the first under felony charges. Joining us now, NBC4 Washington investigative reporter Scott McFarlane, who's covering the sentencing and plea bargaining hearings today for rioters charged for their participation in the Capitol insurrection. And Scott, today you say is going to be a really big day. Frame it out for us.
It's really the perfect test case today, Mika. Paul Hodgkins of Florida faces sentencing. We could get a really good read on what others charged in the insurrection could face for their punishments after hearing Hodgkins' sentence. Here's why. The feds say Hodgkins didn't assault anyone or break anything inside the Capitol, but they say he was inside the Senate chamber with a Trump flag and, in their words, ready for the possibility of violence with a rope, goggles, and gloves. Prosecutors are going to ask a judge to sentence Hodgkins to 18 months in prison today. Let's see what the judge decides. Does the judge spare Hodgkins prison? That'll get noticed. Does the judge go higher and order more prison time? That would send a chilling message to other defendants. And I can give you a preview of what the arguments are actually going to say today at 10 a.m. We spent the weekend reading through the pre-hearing filings. Hodgkins is going to ask for leniency, saying he showed, quote, courage and strength by being among the first to plead guilty. And he's going to draw an analogy to the Civil War, to the leniency Grant showed Lee, which is an interesting choice. The feds will argue about the collective damage, Mika, the $1.4 million in damage to the property at the Capitol, the emotional and physical damage to 100-plus officers. And they're going to say this, Mika, that when he walked from the Ellipse to the Capitol, Paul Hodgkins had 1.7 miles to change his mind, and he did not.
Elise.
Scott, Elise Jordan here. You know, this individual is one of so many who stormed the Capitol, who destroyed property, who wielded, violent weapons. Maybe not in his case, but there just isn't, doesn't seem like there's going to be much repercussions for what happened that day, and very few individuals are actually going to, serve any time for their role in it. Do you think that it's, at the end of the day, a very hard thing to prosecute?
Well, there's another tier of defendants who are, in my words here, higher than Paul Hodgkins. There are defendants who are accused of assaulting police with chemical spray, with baseball bats, hockey sticks, and sharpened flagpoles. There are defendants accused of conspiracy. So Hodgkins gives us a read on whether the judges are going to take a firm line or a softer line based on what the prosecutors recommend. But there are so many other defendants, Elise, who are facing more serious charges and the possibility of several years in prison. This may be a good test case, but it's not the ceiling.
All right, NBC4 Washington investigative reporter Scott McFarlane, thank you very much. And Republican lawmakers inside the Capitol on January 6th, they understood the real danger, despite what some of them say now. The Washington Post's Philip Bump makes this argument in his new analysis piece based on the reporting in an upcoming book by Washington Post journalists. GOP Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska reportedly called the Joint Chiefs Chairman, Mark Milley, to warn him that the situation in the Capitol was really effed up down here. Meanwhile, Senator Lindsey Graham reportedly called Ivanka Trump to get her father to, quote, tell these people to leave. Staunch Trump supporter Congressman Madison Cawthorn told a local paper the day after the attack, quote, I don't want to over-exaggerate here, but it was the closest I've ever been thinking to 9/11, thinking that a major monument to American success and prosperity is being attacked by people who want to subvert it. The North Carolina Republican added in part, quote, even though a lot of those people probably would have voted for me, I can't support that. With more in his analysis of how Republicans felt as the Capitol was overtaken by angry Trump supporters, let's bring in national correspondent at the Washington Post, Philip Bump. And this backs up my cult argument. I'm sorry, but these Republicans who were there, who were barricading doors, who were fleeing for their lives, who probably were more scared than they've ever been in their lives, who were in a situation where people died. Capitol police officers died, rioters died, where there was chaos and violence, and the American flag was used to pummel and torture Capitol cops, where our democracy was interrupted as it was in process. These people are now standing by Trump in their argument that, oh, nothing to see here. Can you tell us more about what you found in terms of Republicans who had very different reactions days later than they did in real time?
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating to see, even for those who are not actively saying, oh, this was not as big a deal as it's been made out to be. There's a lot of silence as well. A lot of people who are simply not saying, here's what actually happened. And if you go back and look at the record, you know, the piece to which you refer was a combination both of new reporting from my colleagues Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig in their new book, and, you know, old news articles like the one that you cited from Madison Cawthorn. But you have all sorts of legislators who in that moment are reacting very strongly, as one would expect, with an angry mob, you know, beating down the doors of the chamber, you know, confronting one another. Liz Cheney, you know, telling off Jim Jordan, a very strong Trump ally, saying that he was to blame for it. Mitt Romney on the Senate side doing the same to some of his colleagues, including Josh Hawley. You have multiple people calling the White House. Kellyanne Conway reported calling Trump and being like, hey, you've got to do something about this. There are all these people who in the moment are saying this is a crisis that needs to be fixed, who then days or weeks later are either sitting mute or actively supporting the idea. There's this famous photo of Representative Clyde, who is, you know, helping to barricade the door of the House chamber and shouting and, you know, obviously agitated, who then later said it looked like a normal tourist visit. And it's just this discrepancy, which is absolutely shocking.
Hey, Philip, Jonathan Lemire. Perhaps the most famous example of this, of course, is GOP leader McCarthy, who was on a frenzied phone call with President Trump during the riot, saying, hey, these are your supporters, tell them to stop. The two men got into a heated back and forth exchange. And then later, of course, McCarthy sided with Trump and has started to downplay the whole thing. Speaking of McCarthy, he is going to be, we believe, announcing GOP representatives for Speaker Pelosi's select committee on the events of that day. What are you anticipating? What you're hearing? What are you reporting as to who might be on there? But more than that, if not particular names, what are the broad themes? Is this going to continue the trend? Republicans whitewashing and downplaying what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, the fact that Leader McCarthy himself, who is reported by a member of his own caucus to have been told by the president that he simply didn't love the country enough, and that's why he's objecting to what was happening at the Capitol, which is just a mind-boggling thing to say that we've heard for months, and so we're sort of used to it by now. But there is no political impetus, and this is the key point, and this goes to Mika's point. There's no political impetus for Kevin McCarthy to take a strong stand against Donald Trump right now. Beyond, of course, the American public rising up and saying, hey, this is something we're concerned about. Within the Republican Party, there remains a lot of confidence in Donald Trump. There remains a lot of interest in moving past this as well, recognizing the obviously more problematic aspects of it. But Kevin McCarthy is not going to put forward people who he thinks are going to take a critical eye toward President Trump's behavior or the Republican Party's behavior. I don't think he's going to go so far as to nominate someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been vocally advocating for sitting on the committee, basically saying that she's going to submarine it if possible. But I don't think that it's like, we may see someone like a Jim Jordan who is put forward as a name, who obviously has he holds a leadership position, but is not going to be someone who's there actually trying to make the commission successful.
The Washington Post, Philip Bump, thank you very much. And tomorrow we're going to be joined by Carol Leonnig and Philip Rucker for their much-discussed new book about the final days of the Trump administration. And just to button up the two stories that we've really framed here at the top of the stories, two strains, really. And that's COVID-19 and the January 6th insurrection. That's what it was. And in both cases, what you're seeing is massive groups of people, including our leaders and hosts on Fox and other Trump networks, and their desire to really deny the truth in the name of their cult leader.